The reason they like reading my stuff is that I've always got real life examples to prove what I'm saying.
There's a lot of good people that listen to this podcast.
Other than God and my family, deer hunting would be next in line on my list of priorities.
From the bottom of our hearts, it's just fantastic and awesome to have the support that you guys are getting.
People ask me about expandable broadheads and love swings.
Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast, brought to you by Osseo Gear with Don Higgins. I'm Terry Peer. Don, I was thinking today, this is episode 140, but I think we just went over kind of our anniversary of starting this podcast. It's pretty crazy what this thing has developed into. I believe we started this in October the first year, didn't we?
Yeah, it was right around the time archery season opened, so I don't remember the exact date.
So we're just over 100, and this is the 140th episode. We've had over 1 million views to this podcast, which is crazy in itself, that 1 million different IP addresses or subscribers or people have downloaded off different platforms. And that's not even counting our friends that listen on MTech and other call-in services. So, there's ups and downs doing all of this kind of stuff, but the last week seemed like it sure had a lot of up. We got a lot of encouragement, and it almost was a God thing, because I almost felt like, let's buckle in and get ready for the hunting season and be able to do this again after a couple weeks of some bad news. But it really means a lot when our listeners rally around us.
Yeah, it's we hear from the haters every day, and occasionally we get those encouraging emails, text, comments, whatever, and actually we get quite a few of them. It's always good to hear those, because some days you just feel like the haters are getting you down, but there's plenty of people that appreciate what we do, and we appreciate them as well, and definitely appreciate them taking the time to reach out and offer words of encouragement.
Yeah, we got quite a few different messages this week that was just encouraging, and people that are listening to this podcast that we didn't even know listened to us. But all we can really say is right now is we got some really awesome things cooking for the podcast to continue to try to, bring more content, bring more stories, and obviously reach others through Lester's Feet. And, usually we wait till a little bit later in the show to talk about Lester's Feet and a family, but I think the hot topic news this week was our good friend Ron Slifer. So I want to go ahead and you've talked to him. I have not. I think you texted back and forth with him. Why don't you kind of explain what happened and ask for some immediate prayers from our listeners as he recovers a little bit?
Yeah, those that are on social media probably heard, but I know a lot of our listeners are not. And Ron and his bloodhound that he lost earlier this year, Dio, was instrumental a few years ago in helping me recover the trump buck I shot. And he's also helped hundreds of other bow hunters, deer hunters recover their deer. And this week he was on a track, and while on the track, he got accidentally shot in the leg with a crossbow. And I'm not gonna say the details, because I'm gonna try to get Ron on here to tell the story. But he was very, very fortunate. That broadhead just missed his femoral artery, which would have caused him to bleed out in a hurry. But he could use our prayers. We'll just leave it at that. He is out of the hospital. He went in for surgery for them to remove the arrow. Got stuck at the veins. The veins were actually stuck in his bone, his femur. But they did surgery and got that arrow out and sent him home, and he's recovered at home now. But he could definitely use our prayers. So let's all, the Chasing Giants family, keep Ron in our prayers, and hopefully we'll get him on here to tell the story. He shared quite a bit with me by text, and I just don't feel it's my place to be saying things, so I'll let him tell it.
Yeah, I mean, and he writes really good. For those on social media that follow his page, even when he's tracking a deer, he's a very good writer. I'm really impressed with his writing skills, but I'm convinced at some point he's going to give the whole story. But people, you are not going to believe the start to finish of this story. So, pretty amazing. But glad he's okay. It was serious enough he had to be airlifted. So. But glad he's home, stable, and we'll try to get him on the show or direct you to the summary of what happened. Um, let's talk a little bit. We had a cold snap. We talked about it last week. So let's talk a little bit and review about what we saw this week, and then we're going to change up the order because one of our listeners submitted questions this week is talking about this drought. And I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about how drought in the fall affects hunters, what we're going to see, and kind of some conversation dialogue about it. But let's start with both you and I kind of giving a summary because we both got to hunt a little bit of this cold front.
Yeah, I hunted Monday and Tuesday. Monday was much better. Monday afternoon, I seen 4 bucks from a stand. Nothing big. I guess there was one mature buck, but he was in the brush and the leaves to the point he's probably 40 yards away, and I could not get a good look at his rack. Then on the next day, Tuesday, I hunted both morning and evening. My first morning hunt of the year. Seen 1 year-and-a-half-old buck on that hunt and a couple of doe and fawn. That was it. And then that Tuesday evening, I did not see a deer. The first time I've been skunked this year. But then the weather just changed, and I think it's the last 3 days we've hit 80 degrees, and the wind has been 30 mile an hour, so just absolutely miserable. And I noticed on my cell cams when that weather changed, those things went dead. They were lighting up when that cold front hit. And the really interesting thing was someone sent me a scientific study saying that the deer movement is not affected by weather. The only thing that affects deer movement is the rut. And I'm telling you what, that's just a perfect example right there of scientific studies can be made to say anything, because you cannot tell me that weather does not affect deer movement. Just this week, I've seen so much of it. I mean, those 2 days when that cold front came through, my cameras were I got 12 cell cameras that are coming into my cell phone, and those things were just going ballistic. And then as soon as this hot, windy weather hit, boom, it just died. So I'll go to my grave believing weather affects deer movement.
I think it'd be really interesting for the people who are watching on YouTube right now to comment down below if you saw the same thing, because we were really warm last weekend and we talked about it and knew that this cold front was coming in. I saw quite a few good deer shot on posted on social media. There was quite a few people that shared those with us and celebrated their harvest, but quite a few deer shot during that cold snap. And then, like you said, it was amazing how dead it got. The only movement I was picking up was well after dark. And I mean, good grief, we were over 80. We didn't have quite as heavy a wind as what you were saying. I saw a friend of ours posting out in Kansas about telling people to watch because of fires, because of this drought. We're so dry, anything can spark a fire. I think 6 logs that I brought in with the tractor and the grapple and had in my backyard to cube up and split for some fire pit wood. And it was so dry. One of the logs was a little bit doughy and rotten on the outside. And I'm not kidding. I put a picture of it on social media. Just the time it took with a brand new chain, that hot muffler up against it actually started making that log smolder. And then, of course, the grass started burning around it. I turned around and saw the smoke, and there was like a hula hoop ring of smolder, even just in my backyard. So the dry and the wind, it's absolutely crazy. But do you have all of your cameras in the spots that you want for the rest of the year, or what's your placement? I mean, have you turned everything to rut? I mean, you probably did that a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah, they've all been turned to rut locations, and I checked several of them this week. There was one day I think I checked 9 cameras, and just to make sure that they've all got fresh batteries for the month of November, and also some of those I hadn't been to since early August, and they were already in areas where I don't move those specific cameras.
Yeah.
They stay there for the entire season, and I just wanted to see the buck shift on those cameras that I hadn't been to in some time, see what bucks had moved in for the fall. But I got several more to check this week and to get ready for November. But yeah, they're all pretty much right where I want them.
I got 2 cameras on that new farm that we picked up this year that are on inside corners, basically where a funnel was coming up into a bean field that I have to move. But the outside of that, everything else is on scrapes. I think it wasn't on the podcast, but I think I told you about the buck that when I went in and poured some Smokies. Smokey gave us some samples of some new products that he gave us this year, and so I went by a scrape that I had a tree stand in, and poured some of that in the scrape. And that night, one of those 5-year-old bucks on my farm laid down in the scrape like he was a dog or something rolling around in it. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Don, I'm not kidding. At least 3 nights a week, that buck is laying in that scrape. I have no idea. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know if he's rolling around in it or he's just laying there waiting for another buck to come, because every night there's a fight in front of that camera, and it's I've never seen a buck lay in a scrape before.
Well, he probably thinks there's a new buck invaded his territory, and he's going to be there waiting on him when he comes back through.
Yeah, that's the benefit of using, and we're not sponsored by Smokies in any means. He's a good friend of ours, and but that's another part of using something that's not at your local Walmart. That's a true gland lure, and man, this thing, I'll just post a picture of it for the people watching on YouTube. I'll splice a picture in here right now. But yeah, I've never ever seen a deer lay in a scrape. I don't know if anybody else has seen that too, but scrape action is definitely picked up. I know the rope scrapes are busy, regular normal scrapes on branches are busy. I just want another cold front like we had last week, and I'm just looking at my phone right here on the weather. We got a little bit of a temperature drop mid this week, but not much until the through the beginning of November. So I'm a little worried about that.
Well, the big thing for us this week is on Tuesday, we're supposed to get a good rain for the first time in about 2 months. And they're calling for over an inch of rain Tuesday with 100% chance. So I'll believe it when I see it, but I got high hopes anyway.
It looks like it's going to miss us. We have a small chance on Wednesday, and then it looks like Saturday and Sunday we have the 30th and 31st we have a small chance. So we don't have a good chance of rain in our forecast by the looks of this till probably November 4th or 5th. So hopefully that changes. We're gonna take a quick break and listen to a spot from Osseo, but we wanted to make everyone aware. Normally, our podcast listeners have a 15% coupon that we share a graphic of. But right now, Joe Miles has asked us to share. He has a special through October 31st. So this week is the last week for it. If you use the coupon RUT22, RUT22, you get a 20% discount on the entire site. So if you're looking for camo and getting it before your November, December season, make sure you check that out. That's even more of a discount than usually what we get for our listeners. So let's take a quick break and play that spot, and then there'll be a graphic later on to remind everybody as we're doing our questions.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear, prepare to be invisible.
All right, Don. Before we before we put up our first question of the day, you had some real interesting feedback from, was it Western Kentucky, on our NutriCrave corn? And we've talked about this being such a game changer. I've talked about how different my farm is this year. I'll never be able to say that's why these bucks are around and I have better food than anybody else this year with the amount of high oil corn and beans and diversity I have. But you got a little bit of feedback more from the agriculture side this week.
Yeah, I did. I talked to one of our customers, and his cousin is actually one of the biggest dairy farmers in Kentucky, as I understand it. I don't know how many dairy farms are in Kentucky, but he's got a sizable one, and he, does everything he can to have the highest milk production with his cows possible. So he's got a nutritionist that he consults with on a continual basis, and they're always taking feed samples and sending in anytime they're cutting silage or whatever. Well, this year he planted 1 acre of NutriCrave corn just to test it next to his regular ag corn. And so when he sent the sample of his ag corn in, he decided to go ahead and send a NutriCrave sample in as well. Well, the nutritionist got the samples and run the test, and he calls him up and says, "Hey, you need to retake that one corn sample." He said the numbers are just they're just totally out of whack. I've never seen any numbers that high before.
He
There's
didn't
got to be
believe it
something
was
wrong.
corn.
Yeah. Well, he the guy says, no, this is it's a different kind of corn. It's a high protein, high oil corn, and the figures were a little over 11% for the protein. And that nutritionist was just blown away. Said he'd never ever in his life seen any corn that high protein. And the crazy thing about it is, Terry, that Dwayne and I sent a sample in, or Dwayne sent it in. I got the sample for him, and that sample came back 13.29% protein, over 13% protein in corn. And this NutriCrave thing is getting ready to blow up in a major way. As I know there was at least one local farmer that planted some for silage this year, real close to the kitchen or the real world corporate headquarters. As word spreads, this thing is going to really take off. That corn is, and for a whitetail food plotter, I'm telling you, there is nothing I don't think that the deer like better. And I'm a big fan of our soybeans, but I'm telling you what, they hammer this corn too.
Yeah, I have to send my samples in to Dwayne or bring him next week when I come. He's been after me to get samples off of my property with not only that, but the other test corn that we did. Um, and we're going to adapt as we go when it comes to this, and we're not actually even satisfied with what it is. We think there's more potential not only for food plotters but the ag industry with the feedback. So guys like Clint Cross that are listening right now, we'll be able to quote and provide ag farmers with product in larger bulk shipments. But our core customer for the real world organization is always going to be food plotters. But I think as this thing continues to grow, we'll be able to adapt and take care of them, especially the agriculture side that wants to participate in this product as we go. Before we put this question up, make a quick announcement about master classes, and I think Ohio is full, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to make sure we talked about, Terry, is the that class at Middlefield, Ohio, that satellite class, if you will, off-site. It's now full. So if you haven't yet sent your money in, it's too late for this year. I'm not sure we'll do it again next year. We might or might not, but that class is full. The others are all over half full. So if you're wanting to attend the master class, you need to get a deposit in pretty quick.
And for our listeners out in Kansas, we also have that big event out there on February 18th. That's a Whitetail Management Summit. Why don't you talk just a little bit about that, because Dr. Strickland is going to be out there for that one.
Right, that's being put on by Philip Seed Farm, who's a real world distributor in Kansas. But in Salina, Kansas, on the 18th of February, It'll be an all-day event. I don't remember the price, but it's fairly cheap. I'm thinking like $60 for the day, and that includes a catered barbecue lunch. So Wes Delks, myself, and Bronson Strickland from the Mississippi State Deer Lab will all be there giving presentations, and then at the end, all of us will be up on stage for a panel discussion to take questions.
Well, we probably need to get a update back from the dream team, but I know that all of us have been getting calls to schedule for consulting. I'm pretty much going to be full. I might, depending on the location, take one or two more jobs if it's close to the ones that I've already booked up. So if you're looking to have me consult, I'm probably better call or contact me really quick. I do still have a couple openings. I think I've taken about 6 or 7 requests for men's fellowships or wild game dinners to come and speak at. If you want me to do that, you better let me know quick, because we'll try to do that when I'm traveling, either for work or for consulting jobs. So I know people think that it's a long ways away, but the way our calendars work, if people are curious about something for the spring, they got to let us know now.
My schedule is pretty much full for the spring, Terry, and I think there was 2 or 3 people reached out to me this week for attending different events, and I was just not able to do it because of my schedule already being full. And it's to the point I've got people asking me 2 years in advance, and I'm not committing anything that far out, but 9 to 12 months out, if you're thinking about something and you want me to be a part of it, you better be letting me know or reaching out. And to be honest, I've traveled so much in recent years, and I'm becoming a lot more picky about what I'm going to do in the future. And I don't mean that as an insult to anyone, but I've lived out of a motel room building this thing up for about the last 3 years for sure. But even the previous decade or so, and I'm getting old enough that I want to stay home.
My undergraduate degree is in statistics, and I just think it's amazing that you've stayed in a hotel as many times as you had and never brought bed bugs back to Robin.
She would have a fit. She'd
The
probably
odds,
put an end to my travels.
the odds are not in your favor. I mean, people don't understand that you've basically traveled a total of 5 months a year. I mean, that's how much you've been gone. People don't get that, but yeah, the odds are not in your favor. You've done good. I bet you've slept in your truck a lot. That's probably what it was.
I have done some of that. There's no doubt. I've done plenty of that. But if I brought bed bugs home, Robin would probably make me retire that day.
You'd be sleeping in the shed.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do a question, because I wanna save plenty of time for this, because it's probably the hottest topic outside of Ron Slifer getting shot in the leg that I've seen on social media, and that's talking about the drought. And we got a question from Nathan that came in that falls right in the line of fall drought and what that's going to mean. So why don't we start with that?
Yeah, this question is from Nathan from Indianapolis, Indiana. He says, well, having drought in my area for my fall food plots and other food sources, will this hinder bucks' antler growth and fetal programming for the next year? Will be less food for them in the fall, winter, early spring months for them to catch up to body weight. Also, will this hinder oak regeneration from the lack of rain to germinate acorns? Most acorns will be eaten or destroyed by insects. Thanks. Well, I can tell you that Nathan is a thinker, because he brought up 2 topics right there that I'd never even really considered. The whole fetal programming thing. It would be interesting to talk with Lee Mitchell and some of his data that he's collected over the years. And I know during the 2012 drought, he had some real interesting findings. So he operates a public hunting area for the Army Corps of Engineers. He's the site manager, and during the gun season, he requires people to check in their deer. And he runs a check station where he takes all kinds of data. And during the 2012 drought, he's seen some eye-opening statistics, or put together some eye-opening statistics. And I actually did a video interview with him on this that's going to appear on the Whitetail Master Academy. But it would really be interesting to see if, like 4 or 5 years after that drought, if he's seen anything based on the whole fetal programming situation. So, that's a question I really can't answer. It's a great question. It's a really thought provoking. It shows that Nathan he put some real thought into his deer management. The other thing with oak regeneration, there's some species of oaks, the acorn actually sprouts in the fall. White oaks, for example, those white oak acorns will sprout in the fall. Now others will lay there throughout the winter and sprout in the spring. But it has been extremely dry. Now this week I did a lot of tree planting on that new 40-acre property I bought, and I was using an auger and planting potted trees and going down about probably on average about 18 inches. And I was just pulling up powder. 18 inches down, there was no
Wow.
moisture there whatsoever. So we really need the rain this week, and I definitely hope we get it. So I'm sure that could have some effect on oak regeneration. Now, in that situation, though, with oaks producing acorns, maybe not every year, but on a regular basis, one bad year is not going to have that big of impact on the regeneration of a forest. But the whole fetal programming thing really uh, has me scratching my head and thinking, I need to get a hold of Lee and see what he has to say about that.
Well, basically what the question is diving into, to just to mind it out further, is the stress. So right now, normally we don't have the stress of the drought on the deer. They maybe have had some of that in the summer, but not this late in the fall. Is the stress going to affect their overall health, so that when conception happens and that fetal program or DNA is kind of outlined, like Dr. Strickland talks about, is that going to lower the glass ceiling? Where I don't think we're talking necessarily about a conception rate. That's a different story. How many fawns are on the ground. We're talking about, is the ceiling of the potential of those animals 4 or 5 years down the road affected by the weather the year that they're conceived? That's pretty deep.
It is, and it's a fantastic question, which is why I chose it to use. But where I'm at, I don't think it's going to have any impact, because there's still a lot of food here, and if we start getting some rain, the deer right now are not stressed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's dry, but we still got plenty of food. There's still water in the creeks. We had we had 3 nights this week where it was below freezing to kill off the midge gnats that would carry the EHD virus. So the deer right now in my area ought to be in really good shape. And if we get this rain this week, well, then they're out of any kind of stress, weather related anyway.
So in areas that I know, that I saw a couple videos on Instagram where harvest is pretty much finished up, I think the dry fall probably accelerated some harvest, that the crops were pulled out of the field earlier. So there might be less food in the field than there normally is in some areas. So, I think this is the opportunity that if you've been dry and you have a permission property or a lease, your food plot has failed. There's still a lot of guys around the country that are still putting in their double crop as soon as they pick their crops. It might not be a bad idea to go in and put a forage cereal grain or a winter hardy cereal grain in right now, if we have a forecast of rain in this coming week.
Yeah, the harvest in my area is probably 90% done, literally. There's a few fields still standing, but not that many. And there was an opportunity, and I'm not sure what the wheat market is at the moment, but there was an opportunity earlier this summer for farmers to contract ahead, the wheat harvest next summer. And I know a lot of them took advantage of that, and I expect to see more winter wheat across the countryside, at least in my area, than have in past years, by a good little bit, actually.
Yeah, the row crop farmers can speak to this a whole lot better than we can, but I think it's all affected by the deal in the Ukraine, which is a, big cereal grain producer. I think that's where a lot of the wheat and barley, I think, is grown. I know wheat, maybe barley, but with that being in flux, I think there was a lot more opportunity for farmers, and a lot of farmers went back to double crop. But I think it's what it is in your area. Our area around here, they're still eating on. We had or fourth cutting alfalfa, and it just hasn't bounced back. Where normally we have a little bit of green alfalfa for them to eat. So I think it's just an interesting conversation, not only for the food, but for also this fetal programming. And there's no way to know for about 3-4 years. But it's like you said, your friend, that he came to a master class one night, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yep.
Yeah, he came to a live podcast, and I think we put him on the spot with a question. But
We did.
to start tracking these years that we have these anomalies with weather in the fall, how does that affect? But you got to have sample data from 5 years later is really what it amounts to. So
Right.
okay. All right. Well, let's move on to question number 2. I think that's pretty fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
The next one comes from Johnny from Columbia, Illinois. He says, "Hi, Terry and Don. Do you think that the Illinois Department of Natural Resources released mountain lions secretly? Thanks, Johnny." The reason I picked this question, I hear all the time, various states, and not just Illinois, various states, our DNR released mountain lions, our DNR released rattlesnakes, our DNR released this, wolves, our DNR. I'm telling you, I don't believe any of it. These state game agencies, if they're going to release something, there is so much politics behind it that it's not going to happen without the public knowing. It's going to be in every newspaper, every news feed across the state if it happens. And I think this question probably stems from the fact that there was a mountain lion hit on the road in Illinois in the last week. And a state trooper stopped, got a report that somebody had just hit a deer along, I think it was Interstate 74. I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyway, state trooper goes to the scene to investigate. The driver did not stop. And instead of finding a dead deer, he finds a dead mountain lion laying right on the edge of the pavement. And yeah, there was pictures all over social media, and I think there was even a press release by DNR. But these state game agencies are not running around secret. And believe me, folks, I'm as anti-government as they come.
If you were going to find a way to bash the DNR, you'd do it.
Yeah, I'm as anti-government as they come, and I buy into a lot of these theories, but I'm telling you, they are not releasing, and I hear it all the time. They release panthers, they release wolves, they release this and that. They're not out releasing, rare species, predator species, or anything like that.
Well,
And if you want to,
number one, they're not going to release anything that they can't generate revenue off of.
right. If you want to read some good reading, that video I posted on social media of the deer with the EHD that was out in the cornfield that I walked right up on and got his. You talk about some anti-government people. These people make me look like Joe Biden's right-hand man.
We're not going to call you Nancy.
There's some crazy ideas just on that one post about an EHD deer.
I'm curious. I didn't see anything about this mountain lion that they found. Was it a juvenile male? Do you remember? Did they say?
I don't know if they said if it was. It was a fairly good sized mountain lion. It wasn't no little one.
Yeah, I don't know if other people have it, but we've had that rumor go around that somebody got a picture of a cougar or a panther or something on their trail camera, and it was, it's never on somebody's property. It's always on somebody's friend of a friend, 3 towns over or something like that. But
I'm not saying it don't happen.
Yeah. I don't think that the government releases wolves or or mountain lions, but I do think that they release Sasquatches because, I do think that there is
Well, I know they did because I went to high school with a kid that shot one once. All it did was growl at him and took a 30-30 right between the eyes. True
I
story.
think
Um,
if we wanted to milk
but,
this for all it's worth, we could go get a beef jerky sponsor right now and advertise the
we
DNR's
probably could.
releasing Sasquatches.
Yeah. But, people do get trail camera pictures, or there are legitimate sightings of mountain lions, bears, or whatever out of their normal range. And like you mentioned, Terry, it's usually a young male that goes wandering looking for his new home range, and those predator species, those males will travel hundreds of miles, and they just wander out of where the normal range for that species. So people do see them, and the mountain lion that was ran over in Illinois is a perfect example. But DNR is not turning these things loose, people.
Yeah, I think Don, when you were younger, right after you got your license, did you drive over to the next town to see if there was any young ladies over there that might not be in your town?
Well, of course, all the ones in my town knew me. I didn't have a chance to see them.
You already had a reputation there. You had to get out. You had to get out and explore.
Next town, I had to go to the next state. No, I'm just kidding.
Just think of what it would have been if you had social media back then, Don.
Yeah, I'd probably still be in jail.
All right, let's put the third question up for the night.
Okay, the next one comes from Carl Parks from Petersburg, Illinois. He says, Don, first of all, let me say how encouraging I am to see both you and Terry standing for what is right and true and your faith in Jesus. Question, I have a deer I've been chasing the past 2 seasons. I passed him 2 years ago as I thought he was 3 years old with a decent rack, but a smaller body, so I let him walk. Last year, he was much bigger and had good mass at 4 years old and body filled in. I have been waiting to see him this season as he usually shows up late in October. He just showed up this week, but he appears to be smaller this year at 5 years old. Have you seen this in your experience in past years targeting a buck only to find him smaller the next year when you would expect him to be in his prime? Do deer regress some years and then blow up when they are 6, or is there other reasons why this occurs? Thanks for any insight you might have for this cause. Thanks for taking time to answer my question. May the Lord continue to bless your work with Lester's feet.
This is another fascinating question.
It is, Carl. Yeah, I've seen bucks regress when you think that they should be putting on inches of antler. In fact, it's fairly common. And we mentioned on an earlier podcast that, at the end of last season, after season was over, I knew the whereabouts of 17 bucks that I thought were potential shooter bucks for this year. And I looked at that list again a couple days ago, and you're going to be shocked. We're going to go over that list here later in the year. I've got more cameras to check, and some of those bucks don't shift to their fall range until end of October, so I haven't checked those cameras. But in the next month or so, we're going to go down that list of 17 bucks, and you're going to be shocked at how few of those bucks actually put on good antler growth from one year to the next. In fact, there's probably more went backwards than they did added antler growth. So it's very common. And yeah, they can go backwards one year, and the next year everything comes together and they add inches. I know of one buck shot several years ago in Clark County, Illinois. He was 9.5 years old, and it scored 214 inches. And there was several shed antlers found of that buck over the years before. Gabe Schaffner, who's in my book, Whitetail Icons, had sheds from that buck. And that buck grew his very best rack at 9.5 years old. So yeah, it can happen. They're all different. Weather plays into it. And speaking of weather, I think the best weather for growing a really good rack is first it starts with an early spring, and we did not have an early spring. Our winter drug on last year, and An early spring gets those antlers growing. That hot weather just influences blood flow or encourages blood flow in
Crops
that
go in
growing
the
antler.
ground early.
Yep, a lot of factors come together. So an early spring and warm temperatures are good for antler growth.
Yeah, we can even go specifically to 2 bucks shot on your home farm the same year. Smokey, the year you shot him, he blew up. What he put on another
20 inches.
20
He
inches.
went, yeah,
At what year? Between 5 and 6?
between 5 and 6.
And then you had the 10-year-old that I shot that same year off your property, that his best rack was actually his when he was 4, I
Right.
believe. 4 was the best rack he had. Now, he was nowhere near the size of Smokey, but just to see that, he went way downhill when he was a 5-year-old. So, the other deer that we mentioned on the podcast last week, that's on a property that you have access to run trail cameras on, we have a story with him over the years, and he's actually smaller than what he was. He's even got one less point, I believe, this year. Isn't that what you were saying? I think he's
The 9.5-year-old.
Yeah. What was his best rack at 6, 5?
His best rack was at 7. At 6 years old, he actually went backwards from 5 to 6. He went backwards and lost inches, but then he bounced back, and at 7 he had his best rack ever. And that was the year that I shot Mel.
Yeah.
If I wouldn't have I shot Mel and Joey, used my 2 only buck tags on those 2 bucks, and if I wouldn't have, I would have shot that buck if I'd had a chance.
Yeah, and he was injured, or something happened to him at one year. He was all banged up and had a bunch of broken points one year before Velvet came out.
Well, what happened that year, it happened actually the year before. He had scours real bad that fall before when he was a 5.5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And you could just see the runs all over stuck to his rear legs and everywhere. And he comes back at 6 with a rack that lost probably, I bet it lost 10, 15 inches. And then he seemed to get over whatever ailment it was, probably a bacterial issue. There's 3 bacteria that really are hit deer hard and have a negative impact on them. That's Fuso, E. coli, and Clostridium. And that'll cause them to have scours. And he got over whatever his issue was. And then he came bounced back at 7, had his best rack ever. So that's a perfect example.
So to circle this up, am I right by saying that every deer's different and every deer's going to peak at different times?
Absolutely. And some deer will peak at 3.5 years old. They'll have their best rack at 3.5.
Yeah, it's I mean, if somebody's wanting to hold off and not shoot one because they want to give it a chance, I mean, that's part of the decisions we all make as a land manager. But there's always a risk that the neighbor's going to shoot him. There's always a risk that he's not going to be any bigger. But if you shoot him as a 3-year-old, you never know if he had the chance anyway. So it's just a decision that you have to make based on where your goals are at and what your journey's at. There's nobody that should be making that decision for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Carl, I think his buck was 3 last year, and this year he's 4, and he's not as big. Well, don't give up on that buck. Just because he didn't make an antler jump from 3 to 4, that does not mean he won't from 4 to 5. So if you pass him, I'd just keep, putting together the pieces of the puzzle and let him go another year. And next year you should be in even better position to kill that deer.
Right. Okay. Well, before we go to the next question, I'm going to ask for all of our listeners to keep 2 situations in your thoughts and prayers for Lester's Feet, for families that we've helped. I mentioned a couple weeks ago the family of Alan and Allie Abney that have a child that's going to be born tomorrow via C-section at Children's Hospital. Thanks to the donors, they're able to both go on FMLA and make sure that they're taking care of both Allie and the baby. But as soon as that baby is born tomorrow, they're taking the baby straight into surgery. So that's going to be done at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So please keep that situation, those doctors and that baby in your prayers. Also, Allie. The second one is it really breaks my heart because the family that helped basically start the vision for Lester's Feet, the Ward family, has been going through a really rough time with the oldest daughter, Tinley, with some seizures. And she got a really, really bad set of seizures earlier this week. Banged her face up really bad, has spent a lot of time in the hospital. They are home now, but they can't figure out what medicine to control these seizures. So it's a very, very sad story. That family had two small girls that had leukemia at the same time. Was pretty much the what would you call it? I forget the word's not coming to mind, but the vision of helping them and the support that family got from the podcast really is what started the whole momentum to create our foundation. So seeing a family still struggling after all this time is heartbreaking. So please keep the Ward family and the Abney family in your prayers. So we're going to move on to the fourth question. We're knocking these out pretty quick this week, but this comes from Joe. Let's see if I can get the screen shared for you.
Yeah, this comes from Joe Nowicki from Hockley, Texas. He says, Don and Terry, thank you for the great podcast. Don, you have mentioned that if it were legal, you would like to run supplemental feed on your property. Could you expand upon that? Would you be mostly feeding corn for attraction or supplements such as protein pellets or cottonseed to try to increase deer nutrition availability? Do you believe it would be a net benefit for feeding baiting to be legalized in your area, given that each property would likely have a corn pile feeder on it? Thank you for all you do in answering these questions. Well, Joe, there's a big difference between baiting and supplemental feeding, and I personally would never want to see baiting legalized in my state. Um, like you mentioned, everybody and their brother would be out there throwing piles of corn out, and it would just be a race to who could create the biggest corn pile. And uh, I've said it many times. That's the biggest thing Ohio has going against it is these bait piles. Now, supplemental feeding, on the other hand, is totally different. And I am a big proponent of supplemental feeding outside of deer season. And no, that's not feeding corn, and it's not feeding a high protein byproduct like cottonseed. It's a it would be a balanced ration, feed ration that provides everything a deer would need, specifically those micronutrients that are in shortest supply in whatever region the property happens to be in. Um, I do think that it's way better if a deer can get everything it needs from its natural environment. And through much of the Midwest, they do pretty darn good on what they find out there through both ag crops and natural food sources. But there's times of the year where um, quality food sources are hard to come by just about anywhere. And in the Midwest, that's in the winter. So I would really like to see supplemental feeding legalized outside of season, where as soon as season was over, a land manager could put a balanced deer ration out for the deer to consume.
Yeah, I live in a bait state, and I'm all for supplemental feeding. I think it's, especially in areas that don't have the big ag, I think it's a vital part of something we can do. I've seen for years, using as much mineral as I do on my property, not all deer will consume the same amount of mineral from a mineral lick for whatever reason. So putting that in your feed is another way to get consumption up for all of the deer. It's just another way for it to get them into their digestive system. With feed like ours that has probiotics and different other humic acids and different things, we can improve the overall health. I think that's a win-win. And we even had some people leave some nasty comments about what we said about Ohio, and saying that year-round crossbows and corn piles were the biggest prohibitor of making Ohio be just one of the, well, it already is, I think, one of the best states, but even better than what it is and what Illinois would do. The one thing that Ohio does, I think, that helps offset the baiting and the year-round crossbows, they only have one buck per year. You put in supplemental feeding or baiting inside of Illinois and let people start shooting $2 a year with a year-long crossbow, you got problems.
Yeah, the other thing that Ohio's got going for it's a late gun season.
Yeah.
The bucks are for the most part done rutting by the time gun season comes around. Makes them a whole lot less vulnerable to the hunting pressure. But for those that live in bait states and that's part of your culture, I'm not saying that I think they all ought to be outlawed. I'm just saying in my home state, my preference, my opinion is I would not want to see baiting, but I would like to see supplemental feeding.
Well, the people are asking you what could be done to get the deer herd to the most mature, highest potential genetic ceiling possible, and you're just being honest with your opinion on that. It's not to criticize somebody for how they hunt. It's in your style of hunting, you have to have. It's like Dr. Strickland says. There's 3 things that you have to have big bucks: age structure, genetics, and nutrition. And we can only really control maybe 2 of them if we're lucky. And all of those other little decisions with supplemental feeding, year-round crossbows, where your gun season is, whether it's high-powered rifles, all of those different things are intertwined in it. So it's just your way of saying kind of what your wish list would be. Joe actually had a second question, and we have a little bit of time, so we'll go ahead and put up Joe's second question and have you answer it.
Hey, Spinks from Quiet Cat here in our virtual showroom space where you can connect with a product expert and learn all about our bikes, our accessories, and what makes Quiet Cat the leader in off-road electric bikes. Schedule a live session today by clicking in the link below or going to quietcat.com/meet.
Joe must have had plenty of time this week. He submitted 2. So his second one, hi, Don and Terry. Love the podcast. Thank you both a bunch. My question is regarding chestnut trees and varieties. I'm looking to plant a few orchards on our property, southeast Oklahoma, and I'm very intrigued by the chestnut varieties. There are no shortage of online sources who will wax poetic about the Dunstan chestnut, and proponents will carry on about all its redeeming qualities. You have stated that you see the Chinese chestnut, not the hybrid Dunstan, as the preferable tree, as it has similar characteristics, but is much cheaper. Do you believe this to hold true across all the features for which the Dunstan is heralded? These include age to bear, disease resistance, volume of mast, preference of mast to whitetail, etc. Do you believe the incorporation of the American chestnut genetics helped the Dunstan outperform the Chinese and American climates? This is the exact type of cutting through the BS that I believe has made your show so popular. So thank you for your feedback. Joe, I wrote an article for North American Whitetail a few years ago on chestnuts. And as part of that article, I interviewed a chestnut expert at Ohio State University and another one at the University of Missouri. And basically what I shared was feedback from those 2 individuals. And I can't recall their names right out of the gate, but I could dig back through old copy of that magazine and I could find it. But both of those gentlemen who know way more about chestnuts than I ever will, both of them thought that the Dunstan chestnut was basically a Chinese chestnut with some big dollar marketing behind it. They both stated that they did not see any American characteristics in the Dunstan chestnut, that it just resembled exactly a Chinese chestnut. And again, that's not my words. That's the words of these two professors from two different universities in the Midwest. Now, my personal experience, I had the tree nursery for several years and did a lot of tree planting on various conservation and wildlife habitat projects. I've got a lot of chestnuts growing on my farm right now. I planted the hybrid Dunstan, the cross between the American and Chinese, and I planted a straight Chinese. And I tell you, I cannot tell the difference. In fact, I've forgotten which ones are which on my farm, so I have no way to even know to this day. The Chinese are just cheaper to buy. You don't have to pay for that fancy marketing and all that. So I would go the Chinese route. In fact, on my new 40-acre property, I just planted some chestnuts, and they are Chinese chestnuts. So again, that's just my limited knowledge of chestnuts, but sharing what I learned from two interviews from two different professors at two different universities who shared the exact same thoughts.
I never thought I'd hear you say to go with the Chinese over the American.
Well, I've been influenced by the Biden administration.
You're the right-hand man, right?
Yeah. Me and Hunter, we're getting kickbacks on these Chinese chestnuts.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Oh.
Joe set us up. So Hunter brought me on board as his tree expert. And
Okay.
now whenever I sell Chinese chestnut, I get $1 kickback from the Chinese government.
Oh,
The
there you
bad thing
go.
is Joe gets $5. I don't think that's fair. I'm only getting one. He's getting 5.
I'm sure that comment will get this podcast flagged and probably removed from the.
Well, as long as we don't mention Trump, we're good.
Yeah. Hopefully YouTube appreciates sarcasm as much as our listeners. So. All right, Don, this week is coming up. Halloween's next week. We've both like hunting the week of Halloween if there's the right weather, but I think it's really going to come down to the weather, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we've got that cold front that's coming through bringing the rain, but it's not going to be too much of a cold front. We're still going to have temperatures in the 60s during the day, but we are getting some east winds. 2 days we're going to have east winds. And I haven't decided what I'm going to do on those days. Probably a lot will depend on my cameras and how they're lighting up. And there's one particular buck I want to go after, but and I need an east wind to do it. But he has not been. I haven't got a picture of him in daylight. So until I get my first daylight picture, I'm probably going to hold off just to keep from burning out the stands I have for that buck.
Well, we've talked about it very numerous times that we like east winds. Not to necessarily say that's the predominant wind, but an east wind usually comes with a weather front. So
right.
It'll be really interesting. I was just looking here at my forecast. We don't have anything easterly until Saturday the 29th. Sunday the 30th is an east wind. Then back to on Halloween, back to the west. But who knows what the weatherman is? We'll have to wait till the day of and to look at your windsock above your shed to see what direction the wind's blowing.
Yep. It won't be long. We're within probably 10 days of really serious hunting, and if the weather would turn, I'd be starting this week. But and I will be hunting this week. Don't get me wrong. But probably won't go after my main buck this week.
Yeah, I'll be in the stand at least 3 nights this week, I would guess. And then the kids made it to state in marching band, so we have that on Friday and Saturday. And then dad duty is over. It's time to hunt the month of November. So looking forward to that. So again, we want to thank everyone for listening through 140 episodes. I had a listener send me an instant message today saying that he had already listened to everything. So he went back and listened to the episode from last Halloween and said that it was interesting to hear how what we were talking about last year still applies and still stuff to be taken. So we get a lot of people saying they go back and listen to old episodes, and we get a lot of new listeners every week. So thanks for both of those. But again, this week was kind of refreshing. We got a lot of good news, a lot of good momentum, and want to thank everybody for their support. It means a lot. It means more than you guys ever know. We kind of have to put ourselves out there when we really don't want to, but you guys have our back, and that means a lot.
Yeah, Terry, I got to thinking this week, to go down another rabbit trail here. When we started this podcast, we intended to share every little detail about what you and I do as we chase giants. And what's happened is this podcast has become so popular that I've really had to back off sharing things. I'm sharing less today than I was when this podcast started, simply because of the people that want to just use me as their scouting source for giant bucks.
Yep.
People seem to think today that if my truck's parked somewhere, there's got to be a giant there. If they find out I got permissions for someplace, there's got to be a giant there. And I've really had to cut back on what I share. When we started this podcast, I was sharing current trail camera pictures. I won't share a trail camera picture today if the buck is still alive, especially if there's a chance that I may target him in the future. So I almost feel bad that we've had to back off a little bit of sharing what we first intended to, but at the same time, I think we're putting out some of the best stuff on whitetail hunting mature bucks out there. I just wish we could share more.
Yeah, but I think we'll make up for it when we share the story at the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
How we're going about it and how we're hunting is still the topic of this podcast. The details of the specific stories we'll have to say after it's over versus how we got there as we're going. But the method that we're using when we're hunting that's what we're talking about every day. We're not keeping any of those secrets back. It's just the details of the specific bucks and where we're at. And I think for the most part, our listeners understand that. But anyway, again, thanks for your support. We'll see you back on, is it Halloween night? Is that right?
Yep.
I
think so.
30th. All right. Well, Don, you have a good week. Hope this temperature drops and get that east wind and get in there after that buck.
Yeah, good luck to you this week, Terry. God bless everyone. Have a great week.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo, Buy a Farm Real Estate Company, 360 Hunting Blinds, Victory Chevrolet, Real World Wildlife Products, Matthews Archery, Novix Tree Stands, Gingerich Tree Farm, WildlifeFarming.com, Quiet Cat, and Vortex Optics. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.